Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're actually mostly going to talk about China and a really fascinating thing that I found that has to do with when it was initially dedicated, or like a dedicatory prayer was given for the preaching of the gospel in China. And this was back in 1921. There's an interesting correlation between when that prayer happened and essentially the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. And we're going to talk about the de-churching, or how people are falling away from churches, both in the United States and in China. And just some really interesting things that I think you're going to want to know about, as well as the interesting timing of the announcement of the Shanghai, China temple. There's a lot going on there. China is a really large country, right? Let me see what their population is right now. Population of China. So 1.4 billion. That's a significant amount of people and a significant percentage of the world's population. So we're going to talk about the future of China. We're going to talk about the second coming. We're going to talk about the preaching the gospel. But first, I have some updates to give you. All right, starting with the Flood the Earth Challenge. We are at 6,494. Just 6 more shares of the Book of Mormon, and we'll hit the next milestone of 6,500. So let's try and make that happen. We've had 4 new people join the challenge since the last time that I updated this. So we're at 6,000, or sorry, that would be great, 6,000. I have 17,000 subscribers. It'd be great if we could actually get to that number of people. But anyway, we're at 678 people that have joined the challenge. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. All you have to do is let me know in the comments or send me an email when you share a copy of the Book of Mormon, whether it's digital through the Gospel Library, the Gospel Library app, or whether it's physical, or however you want to send it. Just let me know. Okay. So there's a few other things I want to talk about first, just really quick, and then we'll get into China. So I got this comment from Sabrina D 2321. That's the handle name anyway. And she says, so my husband is part of the Deacons Quorum, and he just got an email from the church regarding a worldwide day of testimony. This is what the email says. On October 22nd, 2023, youth around the world are invited to gather for a first of its kind youth testimony meeting to bear witness of Jesus Christ. As youth gather and share locally, the world will be filled with testimonies of Jesus Christ. The email says that it's not a centralized broadcast. The prophet and presidents of both General Young Women's and Young Men will give a short pre-recorded message. This is truly a unique experience. Yeah, so that is exciting, and I looked it up. It's on the church website, and it's going to be coming up here pretty quick. October is next month. We're probably about a month, maybe a month and a week or 2 away from this. This will take place after General Conference, so that's interesting. There was someone that replied to that comment. The handle just says user-CR6BU8JW7N. Could this mean that the second coming won't happen before then? I had started feeling more like there was a possibility it could happen sometime in September or early October. Lately, I've just started feeling like it is so close. So here are my thoughts on this. And before you start typing it, stop, listen. Everybody knows especially if you watch this channel, everybody knows that there are different appearances of Christ. We've covered that. I have a playlist for Adam. We've talked extensively about Christ coming to the Jews, coming to the New Jerusalem, what that means, and then the final appearance. We got it. We got it. Multiple appearances. The thing is, as we've studied on this channel, those first two appearances to Adam and New Jerusalem could mean something different than what you read in the scriptures and what you expect to happen. I've already done videos about it. I'm not going to rehash that. Go watch my playlist called Adam and we've talked about the definition of New Jerusalem. We've talked about Christ coming to the New Jerusalem. There's multiple definitions of New Jerusalem, okay? So, when it comes to something happening before General Conference, I think that's possible, regardless of which appearance it is. The reason why is because I don't think there's going to be a period of time when suddenly the church kind of goes quiet. There aren't any more devotionals or conferences, or it's not. I don't think that the church calendar is suddenly going to become blank, because that would tip you off to the fact that, oh, the second coming must be happening, or you might start thinking about that. I think that all the way up until the second coming, his appearance to the Jews, to the world, whatever, I think that things are just going to keep happening like they normally do. And then at some point, you're going to get quickened. If you're righteous and you're worthy of it, you'll be quickened and caught up to meet Christ in the clouds, and then descend with him to the Jews and then to the rest of the world. So I think anything's possible, if that gives you any comfort. I feel like it's sooner than later too. I don't set any dates or have any timelines. I don't have a timeline of future, like when it should happen by, or it can't happen before this happens first, and da-da-da-da-da. So that's my thoughts on that. So anyway, this will be something interesting to think about, and an interesting thing to happen, especially when we read accounts of the Savior when he comes to people, like in the Book of Mormon. The first group, essentially, that he interacts with personally, are the children, right? So maybe this is kind of along those lines. I don't know. So anyway, that's something to think about. Now, I got an email from Gary Stapley. He sent me a link. Brazilian state reels after its worst cyclone disaster. And it takes you to this BBC article, and it says at the top here, torrential rain and winds caused by a cyclone have left at least 27 people dead in southern Brazil, with more flooding expected. The governor of Rio Grande do Sul said it was the state's worst ever weather disaster. Thousands have been forced from their homes, officials said. In Mucum, a town of 5,000 people, hundreds had to be rescued from their rooftops as 85% of the town was flooded, local media reported. And so we've already seen video of this whenever we've looked at my X account, but I haven't put it on my Google Earth account or map or whatever you want to say. So I put a place marker right here. So for this state of Brazil, the southern, I think this is the southernmost state, because I don't think that Brazil has any like states that are islands or anything like that. So this is where it took place. Right next to there, you see Buenos Aires. And so you might think, oh, was that same typhoon responsible for what happened in Buenos Aires? It turns out no. The Buenos Aires flooding event took place on the 17th of August, and this one took place on the 6th of September, which was 2 days ago. So these are like two different things. In both cases, you saw the crazy flooding, like what we see on X. where streets are flooded, they're turned into raging rivers and stuff like that. That happened in both of these places at separate times. And remember, Brazil is part of BRICS. They are the B in BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And then there are other aspiring nations that want to join, like Argentina. Well, it turns out Argentina got hit too. So anyway, what I have right now in here is just from last month, August, and then this month, September. And I'll keep adding to this over time. Okay. Now, the way that this video initially started, and I thought that this was going to be the meat of the video, was going to be based on this article. The Great De-Churching Explores America's Religious Exodus. And this led to China, and I'll show you how. So let's get into this part first. Jim Davis and Michael Graham knew something was up in their hometown of Orlando, Florida, but they couldn't put their finger on it. At the time, both were pastors at Orlando Grace Church, an evangelical congregation, and saw a study showing their community had the same percentage of evangelicals as less traditionally Christian cities like New York and Seattle. Their city also ranked low on a list of Bible-minded cities, with a profile more akin to cities with secular reputations than the Bible Belt communities like Nashville, Tennessee, or Birmingham, Alabama, which didn't make any sense to them. He and Graham knew a number of people who had stopped going to church, and the two pastors started wondering how common that was. They began looking for data, and while there were studies of the so-called nuns, or those who don't identify with any faith group, there were few about church-going habits. Eventually, they decided to do one of their own. Okay, so they raised some money and they got some help. And then it says that study, combined with other data about America's changing religious landscape, led them to a sobering conclusion. Quote, "More people have left the church in the last 25 years than all the new people who became Christians from the First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, and Billy Graham crusades combined." End quote. Davis and Graham write in their new books. And then continuing, the Great De-Churching. Who's leaving? Why are they going? And what will it take to bring them back? Okay, so they wrote this book right here, The Great De-Churching. I'm sure that it's a good book. But I just want to hit on a couple things that they put in this article. The book appears to have struck a nerve with both church leaders and the broader public. Data from the book was featured in a series of New York Times columns about the changing religious landscape and what it might mean for American culture. Burge said the book's surveys build on previous studies of the nuns, in nuns, N-O-N-E-S, right? Like nothing. They don't go to church at all. As well as studies showing the decline of congregational life in the United States. The 2020 Faith Communities Today study, for example, found the median congregation in the United States stood at 65 people, down from 137 people 2 decades ago. Okay, so that's already a pretty drastic drop. We're talking about the median congregation. You look at a congregation, the median was 137 2 decades ago. But now, as of 2020, it was 65. But then, look at this. A recent look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic found that the median congregation in 2023 is now 60 people. So that median number lost 5 people from the pandemic. Something's going on here. This is me talking. Something's going on here. You know, we've talked about this a number of times. We've looked at, for example, the United Methodist Church and how there's been a big schism, mostly over the one side of the church that wants to become more liberal, more tolerant of things that go against their faith, And so it's essentially become two churches. And you have all these different congregations upset at the national church, and they've gone through the procedure to disaffiliate from the main church. So it's like disintegrating. We've talked about the rise of non-denominationals and so on and so forth. And in one sense, that's cause for alarm, right? Because we don't want to see that. They're not members of our church, but at least going to a church that believes in Jesus Christ is better, you would think, than not going to any church at all or not having a belief system based on Christ. But as with everything in life, pretty much everything, with most things, there are pros and there are cons. There are silver linings. There are, hidden blessings that come out of seemingly bad things. And that's the approach I want to take with this video. Right now we're talking about the United States, but pretty soon we're going to be talking about China. But let me finish up with this. Okay, so it's like, oh no, all these people are leaving Christianity, or they're leaving their churches. So let's continue. Meanwhile, the Pew Research Center projects that nuns could make up as much as half the population by 2070. Quote, for a long time, the church declined and no one really cared. And now people are seeing the decline and saying, wow, this is really becoming a problem now. We have reached an inflection point where people are talking about religion in a more thoughtful, nuanced, statistically driven way. That's the end of the quote. The de-churching study eventually yields profiles of different kinds of de-churched Americans. So I'm not going to go over this or else it'll be too long. I was originally going to go over this, but there's like 5 different groups. Okay, whatever. The researchers also sorted out de-churched Americans into 2 major categories. The casually de-churched, who lost the habit of attending church services because they moved or had scheduling conflicts, and church casualties, who stopped attending because conflict or because they'd experienced harm. So those are the 2 out of the 5 groups, the 5 groups that they broke everybody up into. There are kind of 2 main reasons that they left. Either because of because they moved, or because of scheduling conflicts. That's one. And then the second one is because some kind of conflict. I'm assuming the traditional, I got offended, someone upset me, this church leader, whatever, did something bad, and so now I'm not going to that church. All right, continuing, it says each of the 5 profiles had a wide range of reasons for leaving their churches and why they might be open to returning. For so-called cultural Christians, that's like the first group, they left in part because their friends weren't there, 18%, and because attending was not convenient, another 18%, but also because of gender identity, 16%, or church scandal, another 16%. And I wish I knew, if this kind of like what the percentages would be for our church. I'm sure there's probably some study out there that talks about it, but the culture Christians, I think that's a phenomenon probably in every single religion, whether it's Christian or non-Christian. Let me read the definition. Cultural Christians who attended church in the past but had little knowledge about the Christian faith. So just like it says, cultural Christians, people that maybe were born into a church and they do it for cultural reasons because that's their people. That's how they grew up. They want to fit in, right? And we've talked about that group quite a bit on the channel. Anyway, continuing on, here's another group, mainstream evangelicals. They dropped out because they moved, so 22%, or services were inconvenient, 16%, but also because they did not feel much love in church, 12%. Okay, the next group, ex-evangelicals, in this study left because they did not fit in, 23%, because they did not feel much love in the congregation, 18%, because of negative experiences with evangelicals, 15%, and they no longer believed, 14%. So it goes on. There's different reasons. There's kind of like a little conclusion here. Davis said that people leaving churches is often seen as a catastrophe caused by church misconduct or hurt. That plays a role, he said, but the reasons people leave are more complicated and sometimes more mundane. So that's interesting to think about. In the case of like you stop going because you move or because the time that services are held is not convenient. I mean, that would obviously come down to each individual's personal circumstances and whatever. But you have to wonder the role that worldliness plays. You know, the way that you set your priorities. You know, do you have other things as priorities before church? Like, for example, advancing in a career, acquiring wealth, being involved with some other group or some other activity that's more important to you than church. You know, that's something to think about. Not feeling much love in church, that's obviously a problem. These are things that we have to think about. It's really important to fellowship people and to be a friend and not always expect that people are going to come to you first and say, hi, how are you doing? And, you know, because sometimes we can get in that rut, I think. We can be like, you know, why isn't anybody talking to me? Or do people not like me or whatever? But when you really sit back and you observe things, no, that's kind of like the case with most people, except for the people that decide that they're going to be the first ones to go say hi, you know. And occasionally someone will come and say hi to you, but it's just like the Flood the Earth challenge, you know. It's like things don't happen unless you make it happen. You know, if you want social interaction, if you want to make friends at church and have meaningful friendships, unfortunately, both in church and a lot of times in life, you have to be the first one to go do it, because other people are just as, you know, reluctant or scared or nervous or whatever as you were. So the change is when you're the one that makes it happen. Not being overbearing. You have to like read the other person. Maybe you just aren't compatible with that person, but you can't force relationships. But anyway, it's like the difference between being acted upon, just sitting around and not doing anything, expecting for things to happen, or being the one that acts, you know, and making the situation better both for you and for the other person. So if you have someone in your ward that no one's really fellowshipping, especially if they're a recent convert, you should probably think about that, because otherwise maybe they're going to fall into this category of not feeling much love. You know, 18%, that's a significant number. Of course, that's unique to the ex-evangelicals in this study, one of the 5 groups. So, yeah, we got to be aware of these kind of things. Okay, so there's all sorts of reasons that people may fall away. I'll put the link for this in the description below. We know that the world is becoming more secular, and attempting to adjust your priorities to secular things. And if you let the world do that, then you're probably more likely to fall away from the church. There's any number of reasons, but it could actually be, in a way, a good thing, because in the past, in the United States anyway, you had these different denominations that basically dominated, especially in the South. You have all the different denominations. I don't need to name names, but it made it so that people, you know, just stuck with one church, whether it was for cultural reasons, You might have had like a cultural, well, I guess I will use some names, like a cultural Baptist or a cultural Presbyterian or whatever. Not that they really care or know very much about the church, but they stick with it because that's what their friends and families do. Their friends and family do, right? So if you take that away, if they're now not in a category, but if there's a part of them that is sincere, then it kind of opens it up potentially for them to learn about our church. And then maybe they'll feel accepted there. They'll recognize that there's truth there, any number of things. So you see what I mean? Yeah, these big kind of like almost like monolithic denominations in the United States that are being torn down. And in some cases, that's like almost like freeing people from being stuck in that denomination. It opens up new possibilities. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's going to be the case with people who actually care about truth. Right? One of these things happens, they fall away from their church, but they are wanting the truth. And then, the missionaries show up and they find it. And they don't have that other thing that the church that they were going to any longer in the way, for example. So you see what I mean? So this is the point. This is the point where we start talking about China. Something very, very interesting about China. Now, if you didn't know, China was originally dedicated for the preaching of the gospel all the way back in 1921, so before World War II. And it was dedicated by, at the time, Elder David O. McKay, who went on, as you know, and became the president of the church. I strongly feel that David O. McKay, all prophets and apostles are special. The Lord calls them, but some of them, it seems like they play like a more prominent role maybe than others, or they accomplish like really big things. And for me, David O. McKay stands out. We recently talked about him, when talking about Hawaii. Remember, let's go back to the map here. Remember, just last month, again, it's really weird that it's only been a month since this happened, but you had Lahaina that was destroyed by fire. David O. McKay had a lot to do with the church in Hawaii. It was under his presidency that BYU Hawaii was established, as well as the Polynesian Cultural Center. I realize that I think it was with that one, with the Polynesian Cultural Center, it wasn't necessarily his idea specifically, but it was still during his presidency. But one really interesting thing that happened in Lahaina is, again, most of the city burned down. The two chapels that we have there remained intact. They weren't damaged. But in downtown Lahaina, if I can find it, you have this fig tree. It's in the fig family. It's called a banyan tree. Where the heck is it? Oh, I think this is it right here. Yeah. You have this like really cherished tree that survived through the fire. And the last I checked, it is still alive. They're trying to nurse it back to health. But this remained. It wasn't destroyed along with, this is like recent imagery. Yeah, the date of this imagery is on the 12th of last month. So that was after the fire. And you can tell by, the destruction here. So anyway, this survived. And the interesting thing about the banyan tree is that it was planted in Lahaina the same year that David O. McKay was born. And I feel like for that reason, this is symbolic, because if you equate this to David O. McKay, just like the two chapels that survived, so did this thing that has this, connection with David O. McKay. That's just how I look at it. I think it's significant. So anyway, going back to David O. McKay in China, I think it's interesting that he dedicated China, specifically because of what he said in this prayer. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there are a couple really key parts. He says, in this land, there are millions who know not thee nor thy work, who are bound by fetters of superstition and false doctrine, and who have never been given the opportunity even of hearing the true message of their Redeemer. And then later, he says, break the bands of superstition, and may the young men and young women come out of the darkness of the past into the glorious light now shining among the children of men. And then at the end, he says, hear us, O kind and heavenly Father, we implore thee, and open the door for the preaching of the gospel from one end of this realm to the other. And may thy servants who declare this message be especially blessed and directed by thee. May thy kingdom come, and thy will be done speedily here on earth among all peoples, kindreds, and tongues, preparatory for the winding up scenes of these latter days. So the curious thing about this is that, as far as I know, we never did really have any missionaries. Maybe there were some missionaries in the beginning. I have no idea. But if there were, that quickly changed because of the communist revolution in the country. So you might be like, well, so his prayer didn't work. In fact, the exact opposite happened in China. It was completely closed down in a pretty dramatic way, being such a large country and taken over by this ideology that is so hostile toward religion. It didn't work. It's like the exact opposite and worse than you could imagine happened. Well, I'm not so sure about that. Because, frankly, the first time that I heard this, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was like a family member. I don't know if it was someone in my ward. But I think I remember hearing this sometime like when I was maybe a teenager, where someone brought up this dedicatory prayer. But the way I remember it being told, the way that the person related to me, the way that they remembered it, I guess, was that he asked for their dumb, like meaning like not able to speak, their dumb idols to be destroyed and taken away. And now reading the actual prayer, I guess it was kind of, along those lines. And it does seem like that's what he's referring to when you look into the religions that were in China before the Communist Revolution. You had a number of different religions there, some that including Islam, Christianity, but of course more. I have to look at it again, but like more people that were like Taoist and Buddhist and also just like folk kind of religions, like I guess you could say like indigenous, like small local religions. So that was basically the makeup before the communist revolution. All right. So we just talked about America and how these Christian churches, these denominations are kind of disintegrating, which I think is opening up opportunities to reach people that couldn't be reached before. And the same thing may happen with China. And the reason why I think that is because remember what he just said in the prayer. Let's just read a part of it again. Who are bound by the fetters of superstition and false doctrine, break the bands of superstition. Okay? Break the bands of superstition. Now take note of the date that this was given, the 9th of January, 1921. Well, did you know that the Chinese Communist Party was established just a few months later on July 23rd, 1921, according to this Wikipedia article. I wanted to make sure that this was right because the date on this, it is critical to the message of my video. So I searched for it. I came across this Guardian article, The Chinese Communist Party, 100 Years That Shook the World. Let me just read a small part of this. Anyone visiting First Meeting Hall in Shanghai, the museum recreating the site of the first conclave of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, in 1921, will also find themselves in one of the city's fanciest districts. The precise time of the meeting is murky, and the 1st of July was chosen by Mao Zedong years later for commemoration when he couldn't remember the exact date on which the dozen or so comrades had held their conclave. So I think it's probably, and this is the date that I'm going to go by, even though it seems that he just kind of chose that. I can't imagine that he would like have it so far off that it's like in a completely different month. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's possible. According to the Wikipedia article, they're basing it, I think, off of the first National Congress, which was the 23rd of July, 1921. But whatever the case, I think it's probably reasonable to say that at, whatever the exact date, that the Chinese Communist Party was established, it was founded just a few months after Elder David O. McKay gave his dedicatory speech. You understand? What are the chances of that? Let's go to my Second Coming timeline so we can kind of visualize it. So I only have 3 entries for 1921. The Russo-Polish War ended, which was a war between Poland and the Soviet Union. But the other 2 entries are at the beginning of the year, President David O. McKay, dedicatory prayer for the Chinese realm for the preaching of the gospel. And then about halfway through the year, the Chinese Communist Party founded. And just think of what they did to China. Well, let's not just think about it. Let's take a look. All right, so first, let's go to this pewresearch.org article. Government policy toward religion in the People's Republic of China, a brief history. We're just going to read just this paragraph here. The Chinese Communist Party is officially atheist, and its members are not permitted to join any religion. The party's attitude aligns with the Marxist view that religion is a temporary historical phenomenon that will disappear as societies advance. Although this stance has not changed in the 7 decades since the state's founding, policies on the ground have constantly evolved. For example, the current constitution of the People's Republic of China, adopted in 1982, states that ordinary Chinese citizens enjoy freedom of religious benefits. Now, I'm no historian or expert on China, but I'm guessing that from the time, not the time of the founding of the party, but from the time that they came to power, from that time until 1982, I can only assume that there is probably virtually no freedom of religion. That I'm sure there were probably still some people that did. They probably had to be quiet about it, or it was probably, maybe it was kind of like tolerated under certain circumstances. I don't know. But for all intents and purposes, whatever existed before, whatever the makeup of the religious landscape was, it seems that it was probably decimated or at least greatly impacted by the implementation of communism in China. If we look at today, okay, this is Wikipedia's Religion in China article. Here you can see the makeup. This is according to CFPS, China Family Panel Studies. Okay, so whatever. 2016. So this big dark red region is no religion or Chinese folk religion. Okay. Yellow is Buddhist. Red is Taoism and folk sects and other religious organizations. Blue is Christianity. Green is Islam. I'm pretty sure this is not what this pie graph looked like before communism. Okay. Let's go. Interestingly, I found this on the Family Search, like wiki. At the end of their article, they say, let me zoom in some more. The Communist Party has said that religious belief and membership are incompatible with communist ideology. Party membership is a necessity for high-level careers and posts. Okay? So if you want to be somebody higher up in society in China, you have to be part of the Communist Party. And therefore, you know, officially you can't have religious beliefs or membership. All right, that along with other official hostility makes statistical reporting on religious membership difficult. The state recognizes 5 religions: Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Catholic Christianity, and Protestant Christianity. Most people report no organized religious affiliation. However, the number of people with belief in folk traditions and non-religious spiritual beliefs, such as ancestor veneration and feng shui, along with informal ties to local temples and unofficial house churches, is in the hundreds of millions. The United States Department of State, in its annual report on international religious freedom, gives possibly the most reliable statistics about organized religions. In 2004, it reports the following: Buddhists, 8%. Taoists, unknown. Muslims, 1.4%. Protestant Christians, 0.8 to 1.2. Catholic Christians, 0.4%. So, that seems quite a bit, well, it seems a little bit different from this. It said Buddhism 8%, whereas this one says 15, which, well, almost 16, so almost twice as much. So who knows, but it's probably something like this. You know, that's all you really need to know for the purposes of this video. That it's something like this. That in Chinese culture, it's beneficial for you to be atheist if you want to succeed in worldly terms. But what's going to happen in the future? Now, I don't think that the Lord inspired the Chinese Communist Party, you know, like he did the U.S. Constitution. I don't think that that's what happened. I think that he allowed it to happen. There's probably so many things that Satan wants to do that he could do if the Lord just permitted it. I think it might be somewhat like a dam, like how you have that constant pressure pushing up against the dam, but the dam is stopping it. And so, in the same way, the Lord can remove, you know, parts of the dam, so to speak. Not that dams work that way. Well, there's like the drainage at the bottom, the whatever you call that. But, well, yeah, that's like a perfect analogy. Yeah. Okay, hold on. That was pretty good. Good job, Jared. Good job. Okay, parts of a dam. Images. Civil engineering. Heel toe gallery. Sluiceway. I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Control section. Okay, so like for this one, for example, it looks like you have this where you can have an overflow. Oh, and there's an outlet. I think that they can control how much water comes through the outlet. Because I feel like I've seen that a number of times in like news stories when they're trying to prevent flooding, when the water level is getting really high, or whatever. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. So I think that the Lord is kind of like this. Satan's the reservoir of horribleness, always trying to push and trying to, perform whatever his will is, implement his plans, but the Lord stops him. But in certain cases, he allows things to happen. And therefore, you get people like Pharaoh, who, the scriptures in the King James Version, it reads that, the Lord hardened his heart. We know that that's not the case. And if I remember right, the Joseph Smith translation changes that. The Lord didn't harden his heart or make him do things. He allowed him to, right? So the same may be true of the Chinese Communist Party, that everything was there, the pressure was all built up, and so the Lord let it happen because, it would, and I don't know, I'm not saying that this is doctrine, but it would fulfill David O. McKay's request in his prayer, which certainly was inspired by the Lord, right? And therefore, since that time, you've had, who knows? You'd have to be a historian, an expert to really know the true impact of communism in Chinese religious life. But as a layperson, I think that you can reliably say things were changed quite a bit. In the old way did not continue forward. And so, as we're approaching the millennium, it seems like maybe in this kind of way, China has actually been prepared to receive the gospel. And that's my belief. I think that's right. I think that China has actually been prepared. And that's probably the proper way to look at it. Not that anyone's cheering on communism. It's horrible. And we hope that it can be removed as quickly as possible. But the time will come when it falls. And you're going to have all these people that, at least a few generations have gone by where, the older generations probably died off. Probably many of them didn't really pass on their religious beliefs. And so you have at least some group, a substantial group, that's probably ready to receive the gospel whenever this system is changed in China. Now, what's interesting is that we do have a presence in mainland China. You can go to, this is the temple map. So you can see that we have the Hong Kong temple already. It's been there for a while. It was the 48th dedicated temple. So it was before the 100 mark. It was within the first 100 temples. And then we have the Shanghai temple that's been announced. The interesting thing about the Shanghai temple is that it was announced during the April 2020 General Conference. And that kind of got me to thinking, because it was a significant conference, is that why that particular temple was announced during that conference? Many of us have felt that the conference was some kind of pivotal moment or milestone in our progression toward the second coming, especially because we had that solemn assembly. By the way, I can't verify this, but someone had mentioned how the conference center had a Hosanna shout, and there was an article by, I think, the Deseret News that alluded to it being a solemn assembly as well. But if it was, they didn't say it during General Conference. So I don't know if the conference center and that Hosanna shout was technically a solemn assembly, but it could have been. I say that because I did a video a while ago, and when it comes to General Conference, The solemn assembly that was called for the April 2020 General Conference was unique, at least going back to 1942. From 1942 until April 2020, there had not been a solemn assembly called for this purpose or in this manner. So we did the Hosanna Shout. We've talked about the significance of the Hosanna Shout and how that could likely be part of the events that are supposed to take place for the second coming. So with all that in mind and everything that happened during that conference, on top of that, you had these temples that were announced. I'm going to go to President Nelson's talk, Go Forward in Faith, where he announced, a bunch of temples, but probably most notably, due to how unusual these locations are for our church, you had the Dubai United Arab Emirates temple that was announced, and then the Shanghai People's Republic of China temple that was announced. Two temples that you probably wouldn't have guessed were going to be announced, and they were. And they were during that particular general conference. And what's interesting is if we look at this general conference, the April 2020 general conference is like some kind of special second coming conference, then maybe this is kind of a preview of what we have in store at the beginning of the millennium, or maybe shortly before the millennium. The gospel going to these countries that have been closed off. So right now they're still closed off. We do have these temples planned. The United Arab Emirates actually invited the church to build the temple there. So it's interesting. It's interesting how things are progressing. But this right here could be a preview or a sign or a signal that the time is coming soon, when the gospel will go to these countries, either before or after the second coming. And I tend to think probably after. That's based on the studies that we've done on the channel when it comes to the gospel going to all nations, kindreds, and tongues. And it would seem that that's well on its way, if not completed, as far as the prophecy is concerned. Some people like to get very, very literal and say that missionaries in pairs have to be in every single country, every single political border. Some people go even further and say that every single person on earth has to hear it. And that's not what I found at all when I searched the words of the prophets and the apostles. In fact, we've learned that the beginning of the millennium is going to be the greatest time for missionary work, because Christ's political kingdom is going to be installed, and you're not going to have barriers like there were before. So it very well could be that China, through its history and the process that it's gone through, has been primed for the millennium. And if I were to guess, and it is a guess, I would guess that that's probably the case. There's more to look at. If you go to the church's meeting house locator, you'll see that we have meeting houses in Macau, which was just like Hong Kong. It was like leased by Portugal, and then Hong Kong was leased by the United Kingdom. So they're a little bit more open there, from what I understand. Like they're more westernized. They have some more freedoms. I don't know all the legality of everything there, but so yeah, we have congregations there. You'll notice that we don't in Shanghai, but this is where the temple is going. Let's look into that really quick. There's this Salt Lake Tribune article. Plans for an LDS temple in Shanghai may have hit an obstacle. This was written April 29th of 2020. So almost immediately after that general conference. And remember, it's being written by the Salt Lake Tribune. Not to say that they don't do a good job, but when it comes to things that have to do with the church, they usually take a pessimistic point of view. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints may have hit a bump in the road, somewhere between a pebble and a boulder, with its temple plans in Shanghai. Within days of President Nelson's remarks, though the Shanghai Municipal Ethnic and Religious Affairs Bureau said twice on its website it knew nothing about a quote-unquote Mormon temple being built in the city of more than 24 million people. In response to a question posed on Weibo, or Weibo, I don't know, China's Twitter, the Bureau first wrote, quote, "Foreigners are not allowed to establish religious organizations or areas of religious activity within China's borders." And the news that the American Mormon Church announced that it is building a temple came only from the American side, end quote. Later, the Shanghai organization repeated the statement about foreigners, insisting it, quote, "knew nothing about the American Mormon Church building a so-called temple in Shanghai," end quote. The second statement added, quote, "wishful thinking, not based in reality," according to an independent translation. Neither statement, however, indicates that the temple can't or won't be built. The temple flap was noted in Foreign Policy's April 2022 newsletter. For its part, the church declined to comment on the Shanghai Bureau's statements. All right, and then later in the talk, 10,000 or more members. The church organized its first branches for Chinese members in 2004, according to independent Latter-day Saint demographer Matt Martinich, and today has a presence in most of China's major cities. So the reason that we don't, I'm guessing from this that the reason why we probably don't see other meeting houses in China is probably because they have to meet in an unofficial way, in a way that doesn't break the law of the land. You know, maybe it's easier to do in cities like Macau, in Hong Kong, but elsewhere, yeah, you can be a member of the church, but there's no meeting houses, or the way that you associate with other members of the church, maybe it's just very limited. I don't know. If you know, put it in the comments below. Okay, quote, "There appear to be at least 10,000 Latter-day Saints in the People's Republic of China." I should have pulled this up. LDS membership by country, Wikipedia. 10,000 may not sound like a lot, but let's look where China would fall. Okay, let's sort this by membership. So 10,000 would be about right here. It'd be like comparable to, oh, they have China right here. Look, 10,500. So that's more than Sweden, Ukraine, Switzerland, Netherlands, Indonesia, Jamaica, Guyana, Belgium. I'm skipping some, I know. Hungary, Russia, Angola, Austria, Norway, Denmark. They have more members of the church than those countries. You know, I realize that they have a very, very large population. They do. But the gospel is there. And I know that some of them are foreign, but not all. Let's go back to this article. Quote, "There appear to be at least 10,000 Latter-day Saints in the People's Republic of China, the vast majority of whom are likely PRC citizens." So the majority are actual Chinese, according to this statement, or at least it appears that way. Martinich writes on his blog, ldschurchgrowth.blogspot.com, quote, "Shanghai is one of the three major church centers in the PRC for both foreign and PRC citizens, the others being Beijing and Guangzhou," end quote. Periodically, a representative of China's government attends services in Beijing, members say, and reports back to party bosses what happens there. So that's interesting because they just said Beijing, but we don't see any meeting houses. At least on here, we don't see any meeting houses in Beijing. Maybe they're not allowed to be on the church website. Like maybe they can't be advertised. You know, this would be considered like advertising. I don't know. If you know more about this, put it in the comments below. But anyway, continuing, the Utah-based Faith reported in 2010 that it was engaged in quote-unquote high-level talks that were expected to lead to regularized church operations in China. A senior representative of the People's Republic of China huddled with the Faith's governing First Presidency in Salt Lake City on August 24th. Remember, this is talking about the year 2010. So August 24th, 2010. A church spokesman said at the time. Continuing, it says, that session came on the heels of meetings in February and May in Beijing, initiated by the Chinese representative and attended by Mormon apostle Dallin H. Oaks, end quote. Oh, well, I guess it continues. A church spokesman said then that, quote, church says that the church deeply appreciates the courtesy of the Chinese leadership in opening up a way to better define how the church and its members can proceed with daily activities, all in harmony with Chinese law, end quote. Nearly 10 years later, so 2020, some of the credit for the planned Shanghai temple likely is due to Nelson, a former cardiac surgeon who long has had a warm spot in his heart for China. In 1980, he trained doctors in China, and it was there in 1985 that he performed his last open heart surgery. In 2015, he was honored by physicians he trained at the Shandong University School of Medicine. And in January, the church sent 2 plane loads of protective medical equipment to the Children's Medical Center in Shanghai to help deal with the coronavirus outbreak. Nelson has promised that the church will continue following all China's rules governing religion. Now, listen up. The Shanghai temple will be limited, quote, to Chinese church members holding a valid recommend. These Chinese members will have a membership record in the China administrative unit of the church or will reside outside of China but hold a valid PRC passport, end quote. And then later, despite its unofficial status, the LDS Church, quote, has built a strong relationship of trust with the People's Republic of China by always respecting the laws and traditions of that country. Again, I want to point out, this is the way that the church does things. This is the way that the Lord does things. Of course, the Lord is above that, and when he will, he does. But this is what we are supposed to do as members of the church. We abide by the law. Okay? When it's constitutionally just, and in this case, we respect their country. We're not renegades. We don't do things under the radar. Okay, continuing, the church teaches its members in each country to obey, honor, and sustain the law, to be good parents and exemplary citizens, and to make positive contributions to society. End quote. Latter-day Saint temple ceremonies in China, quote, would be consistent with traditional Chinese culture and values. This includes positive emphasis to strengthen marriage and family, honor ancestors, encourage family and clan histories, and nurture character, virtuous moral standards, and traditional values, end quote. As of Tuesday afternoon, though the Shanghai Temple is the only recently announced one. Okay, sorry. As of Tuesday afternoon, though, the Shanghai Temple is the only recently announced one not mentioned on the church's official online tally of established or planned temples. Well, that was back in April 2020. I wanted to see if that was the case today, and it's not. So, okay, where the heck did it go? Oh, here. Where did it go? I had it pulled up. China. Here we go. I don't know how that happened. So this is as of right now on the church website. It does have it listed. So they must have resolved whatever that problem was, because it's back on the website. So you guys, it's so interesting how, like I said, it seems like China has been prepped. It's been prepped. And this next part, I think, is what makes it even more miraculous. So first we have David O. McKay's dedicatory prayer, right? And then we have the establishment, essentially, of the church in China. It's small, but compared to other countries, it kind of fits in. And we're going to have these 2 temples in China. Now, when it comes to President Nelson specifically, and how it's said that he has kind of a soft spot for China, let's read why. And I think this is exactly why. In The Hope of Israel Worldwide Youth Devotional in 2018, this is what he said. Let me tell you about an experience I had in 1979. I was then serving as the general president of the Sunday school. So this was, pretty much right before he became an apostle in 1984. I was invited to attend a meeting of church leaders at which the president of the church, President Spencer W. Kimball, spoke. He charged us to pray that the doors of nations would be opened so that the gospel of Jesus Christ could be brought to all people on earth. He specifically mentioned China and asked that we pray for the people of China. He also said, quote, "We should be of service to the Chinese people. We should learn their language. We should pray for them and help them," end quote. I returned home to my wife, Dancel, who passed away more than 13 years ago, and said to her, President Kimball asked us in that meeting to learn Chinese, and I did not hear him say everyone except Brother Nelson. So would you be willing to study Mandarin Chinese with me? Of course, she agreed, and we were tutored in Mandarin. 6 weeks after President Kimball's charge, I was attending the annual meeting of the American Association for Thoracic Surgery. It was being held in Boston, Massachusetts. That morning, I prayed in my hotel room for the people of China, just as President Kimball had requested. I went to the first meeting of the day and sat where I always sat at these professional meetings, at the front of the room. As the meeting proceeded, however, I became increasingly uncomfortable in my chair. As the lights were turned down for a slide presentation, I slipped out of my chair and walked quietly to the back of the room, a place where I would usually never sit. When the lights came up again, I found myself sitting by a Chinese doctor. He introduced himself as Professor Wu Yingkai from Beijing, China. After a pleasant conversation with him, I extended an invitation for him to visit Salt Lake City and give a lecture at the University of Utah Medical School. He gladly accepted and did exceptionally well. Then he returned to China. Not long after, he invited me to be a visiting professor of surgery at Shandong Medical University in Jinan, China. That led to subsequent invitations for me to serve as a visiting professor at 2 more universities in China. These wonderful professional experiences, prior to my call to the 12, climaxed when I was asked by Chinese surgeons to perform an open heart operation to save the life of their most celebrated opera star. That I did, and gratefully the operation was a success. It was, incidentally, the last one of my professional life. For almost 40 years now, I've been praying for the people of China. Look at that, for 40 years. And that's an interesting number, by the way. I rejoice in my association with medical colleagues and other dear friends in China. What a joy it is for me now to be officially designated as an old friend of China. It is my testimony that when we follow through with whatever the prophet of God asks us to do, the way will be opened and lives will be changed. You guys, he learned Chinese and now he's the president of the church. And like the Salt Lake Tribune article said, it's likely President Nelson's essentially experience with China that led to what will be the Shanghai temple. And who knows what other progress the church may have made with China because of that. You know, if this prophet, you know, whether he's the prophet of the second coming or maybe the one right before or however it works out, or maybe two before, who knows, I don't think it's coincidence that he learned Chinese and that he's president of the church right now. If he is the prophet of the second coming, then he's already done a lot of work with China as far as the church is concerned, and he may do even more, you know, as we begin the millennium, as far as like setting things up there. Imagine if he gave an address to the Chinese that remained after the second coming, and he gave that address in Chinese. These people that have not really been free to be religious or have religious freedom, in the little bit that they do, it is just a little bit. And you have this prophet, you know, you now have freedom, and Christ identifies his church, and you hear from the prophet of his church, and he speaks Chinese and doesn't need a translator. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if he still fluently speaks Chinese, but that would be kind of amazing. I want to end this with this. This is in the May 2018 Ensign. It's actually an article from Elder Neil L. Andersen of the Quorum of the 12, the Prophet of God. And he tells a story, a short story about President Nelson. In 1982, 2 years before being called as a general authority, Brother Russell M. Nelson said, quote, "I never ask myself, when does a prophet speak as a prophet and when does he not? My interest has been, how can I be more like him?" And he added, "My philosophy is to stop putting question marks behind the prophet's statements and put exclamation points instead." End quote. This is how a humble and spiritual man chose to order his life. Now, 36 years later, he is the Lord's prophet. Miracles take place, you guys. I know that they do. I've seen it in my life, but you can see it here. We talked about it right here in this video. It is amazing to me that he learned Chinese. And it's amazing to me that David O. McKay gave that prayer before the Chinese Communist Party was founded. Essentially when the floodgates were released. And all the prior traditions and stuff like that. And like he said in the prayer, superstitions. I'm sure a lot of them were essentially destroyed for generations to come, but preparing future generations to receive the gospel. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.